In the last video, I showed you how to use the Morph by Curve Dynamo Player tool to alter the shape of surfaces based on the difference between a straight and arced curve. Then I used Feature Modifier to transfer my letters to those target surfaces. Picking up where I left off, now I'll show you how to use these surfaces to render an image that could be used for a bump map in VRED. Before exporting the lettering, I want to create a square that's exactly the same size as the tire. I can use this as a guide for rendering in VRED. So using the same rectangular surface from Curves tool I used in the previous video, I'm just going to click on an outermost part of this tire to create a square that is the same size as the tire. I'll pick these elements and export them out. And before I leave Alias, I wanted to show you a couple more Dynamo Player tools. Here my text lettering takes on the curvature of the tire, but if I just needed flat surfaces, there are a couple things I could do to turn these curves into surfaces. One is the Surface from Curve Loop tool. I can just select the letter curves and it creates a surface. And the nice thing about this tool is that I can move the CVs after the surface is created and they will retain history and update. One limitation is if I have letters such as the A, O, and D that have inside shapes, it won't work for those. But there is another tool I can use for that, and it's called NURBS Closed Curves to Solids. Here I'll just pick the outer curves of a letter, press the spacebar, and then the inner curves, spacebar again a few times until it builds that surface. And it does give it dimension, F for fit, which I could just delete if I chose to, or change the solid height, give it chamfer, fillet, etc. Next, I'll import the trimmed letters and the square to VRED and show you what I do with it in there. I've imported an untrimmed version of the tire into VRED. And it did take a while, so a pro tip is you could choose to import this tire with merge geometries checked off. You can always do that after import, and in this case, I will want to merge because I do have so many nodes in my scene graph representing this tire, which isn't great for performance in VR. If you're rendering, it's irrelevant. And if you want to retain that NURBS data for surface evaluation or to be able to do some color breakup, then I wouldn't convert these to polys because it will lose that information. But in this case, it's all going to be the same material, so I'll do a couple steps to convert to mesh. And then also clicking on the top of the group, I will merge geometry, which leaves me with a single poly node in my scene graph to represent my tire. Now I'll hide this tire, and with nothing selected, I'm going to import the file I just saved from Alias. And normally it's fine to have merge geometries checked on. So here I have the lettering and the square that we created in Alias, and I want to make a black and white image from this. So I'm going to make sure that my plane is truly a black material and that my lettering is white. You could even bump up the white by giving it a little incandescence. And next I want to control the size I'm going to render and set up the camera to do this. So I'm going to go with a 2K image, and for the camera I'm going to be looking through my side camera, and also in render settings I want to show the snapshot that will give me a preview, the yellow border that shows me what I'm going to render. So I want to zoom in just to the same size as that border, and then in my camera settings I'm going to save a viewpoint, create viewpoint, always a good idea to name it. and choose it when I go to render under my side camera, and I should be good to go. So I'll just hit render, name it, and I don't need to ray trace for this, but I do need to go into Photoshop to complete one last step. So I will open that image in Photoshop and just change it to a grayscale type image, so it's no longer an RGB. And I'll save it over itself. Hop back over to VRED. Now we're ready to start working on the tire again. And I want to make sure I'm looking through my perspective camera again. And I'm just going to turn off those settings that show what I'm going to render. And in my material editor, I want to create a brand new tire type material. Assign it to my tire. Make it a little darker, maybe not quite so glossy. And then under bump texture, I want to use markings and navigate to that file I just saved. And I want to make sure it's correctly mapped since it's a cylindrical type texture. So I'll make sure my tire is selected and say get from object. And here I've got a nice bump map created using some tools in Alias and VRED.